Starting at the beginning of the story, beginning all the way back in the 1830s, when a few capitalists formed a company called the Missouri and Illinois Mineral and Land Company. The company set out to look for agricultural and timberlands that might become valuable as the country improved over time. The company was composed of John Tappins, W. H. Bidwell, Charles Stoddard, Jas A. Smith, and John S. Cavender, among others. In the winter of 1868, the company sent mineralogist and geologist Forrest Shepard to find and locate valuable lands. When he was near the mouth of Platte Creek, where it flows into the Mississippi River, he found sand that appeared to be of good quality to make glass. 2 casks that were sent to England determined the St. Peter's sandstone found in the area was of superior quality for glass manufacturing. Dr. Bidwell, editor of the Electric magazine, had gotten a hold of the land after its stock was sold to the highest bidder. In the fall of 1868, Dr. Bidwell, Forrest Shepard, and Professor Vincent of London, England, had decided to visit the land. It was while they were on the sandbanks of the Platte Creek that they decided that they would make a glass factory there. It was Forrest Shepard that said it was only a question of time when a great industry would spring up here. While his statement was very true later on, it was not as true on the first attempt. Eventually, Dr. Bidwell's glass factory failed. Captain Ebenezer B. Ward of Detroit, a large capitalist, bought out Dr. Bidwell's claim to the land and all the adjoining land and proceeded to build the American Plate Glass Company. Captain Ward would oversee the plant. In May of 1872, Captain Theodore Luce, as the superintendent, had commenced operations so that by July 4th, there would be one house almost completed. Building had begun on the rest of the plant, and workmen were recruited from surrounding farms. A town was starting to form around the factory, and it was at the first annual meeting at the main office in Detroit, Michigan, that the question was brought up to see if the natives preferred the name New Detroit. The residents had a name of their own, Crystal City, and the name was quite appropriate, thus it was adopted. In the summer of 1874, the first plate glass was cast. It consisted of one box furnace of unknown description. Plagued by investment and quality problems, death and sickness, the factory failed due to the lack of skilled glass workers and the death of Captain Ward. In 1876, brush was cleared and some homes were built for the workers and their families, moving to this new town. It was later, in 1877, the plant had already failed and the entire enterprise and its land were sold to the Crystal Plate Glass Company of St. Louis for $25,000. The company office building was built in 1885. By 1888, the Crystal Plate Glass Company repaired many things from the American Plate Glass Company, and built 4 gas-fired furnaces and produced plate glass. The glass was made on large square tables, ground with sand, smoothed with emery, and polished with rouge. The Crystal Plate Glass Company would provide a lot for the residents of Crystal City. They employed about 1,200 men, while they retained absolute ownership of the town. By 1888, the company built over 300 cottages for its operatives and charged an average rental of $6 a month for 3 rooms. The company also contributed to the construction of 2 schools, one for the white children and one for the colored. There would be a large 2-story frame building containing a gymnasium and a library, which was built for the glass workers. The company formed a store, built a railway to the river landing for coal, and a railroad had been built to connect the glass factory with the Iron Mountain Railroad at Silica, Missouri. Originally a narrow gauge line, it had been widened to standard gauge. However, there was not a church in Crystal City. There was a foundation laid with brick and stone, which was large enough to fit 300 people. The church would be completed in 1891. The Grace Episcopal Church would be the only church in Crystal City. Oftentimes, there were more workers than there were houses in Crystal City. Most all of the residents lived in Crystal City, but there were a number of them who lived in either Festus or Crystal Heights. The company would not allow a saloon or dram shop. There were quite a few people that found a way around this, and the town of Tanglefoot would be formed because of it. Named after the whiskey that would get sold to the workers, and when they were walking home, would often have their feet tangled in the brush. The Crystal Plate Glass Company would remain in operation until 1895. In 1895, the factory, town, and all its holdings were acquired by the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company, which later became PPG Industries. Between 1901 and 1903, PPG closed the factory, and revealed plans to build an entirely new factory. In 1904, PPG expanded the new factory. In 1906, PPG started efforts to expand the town by selling lots to private citizens. In 1908, PPG built a new factory powered by steam, which generated direct current electricity. Crystal City Works 9 had become the largest plate glass plant in the world. Later, in 1924, the new PPG office building, the hospital, and the Crystal City Bank joined Grace Episcopal Church to become the anchor of Crystal City. In 1925, Union Electric brought a power line down from the east side of the Mississippi River from Cahokia. It crossed the river to a tower on Buck Knob to supply the new factory with electricity. Between 1925 and 1930, PPG constructed a continuous flow tank and a 1,100-foot ribbon grinder and polisher.
You can probably see that there are different stones on each side, different heights and such. You can see maybe how the stones are burned out in different places and such. And then you can go down and see the roof. It's a pretty fancy setup. In that hole there, they would run a water cooler in, the same as on the side that I came in. It would more or less, I don't know what it really did, keep the glass at the right temperature, what they put it in and out and over and under. This was the other end, and the mouth that you're looking at is where the glass came out. It had a little chute there and went on down into the tin bath, which was melted, and that's how they got the finish on the glass and everything else. They still have a lot of glass in this tank here. Probably not too much, but they've drained out the biggest part of it. That was a process. It was a very hot job.
Next, in 1935, the Duplate department began as a factory inside a factory. The glass from this department was made into automobile windows. A newer part of that department was the Herculite department, where the glass was tempered by heat to give greater strength for use in automobiles. Then, in 1937, with the safety glass department and the tank department completely replacing the casting hall. On April 9, 1937, the first issue of Glass Rays was released. There was no name for the newspaper then. During World War II, PPG set up the bomber department and produced canopy subassemblies for the Curtiss Wright Company. Work done by the Duplate department led to the formation of an aircraft glass division within PPG. The timeline then jumps to August 16, 1972, when the last plate glass was made in Crystal City. In 1985, first words of Works 9 closing were announced, but it was operated until December of 1990. The last remaining months were very critical and were the most memorable for many people. In May of 1990, Crystal City Works 9 was turned over to the salvage company. On June 1, 1990, the doors of the main office were locked. Glass was shipped until December. December 30th, 1990, Union Electric made an appearance to shut off the power, and the last life drained from Crystal City Works 9. Spring 1992, the only remaining parts of the plant were the number 1 and number 2 smokestacks. March 30th, 1993, the last remaining piece of the PPG plant, the smokestack, was demolished. Today, nothing of the glass factory remains, other than the company headquarters building and the hospital. Both are now used for other purposes. It is especially important to note how many families worked at the glass plant through the years. Oftentimes, you would see generations working at the plant, sons and their fathers before them. Some of these stories have been memorialized, but there are many that were not. Here are a few interviews and discussions that I had with various people who had been in some way involved with the glass plant. This is their story.
When I first started seeing the posts on Facebook about the fact that you were going to do a documentary and you were looking for information, and I saw the kind of things that where people were telling you to go, and that I thought, I read those and followed those for a few days, and then I thought, but wait, Clayton, you need to understand, this is a story about families. The United States has lost our manufacturing base. in industry, it is a statistic that every manufacturing job creates 7 downstream jobs.
Right.
You have your banks and your grocery stores and your churches and all the support in a town to support those manufacturing jobs. And this is why, as America started moving manufacturing jobs overseas, so many of our towns, especially company towns, and I say that with the deepest respect and love for Pittsburgh plate glass. Sorry.
You're fine.
We were never a company town like the terrible ones you read about. You know, the coal mines were different, and places where you heard about sweatshops back east where people were underpaid and treated poorly. That was not our situation. And glass rays, as you look through glass rays, you will find wedding announcements and baby announcements.
I was looking through some, and they just wrote whatever. Like, I mean, anything that came to mind, they wrote.
Celebrations. Yes. But anyway, so company town to us was awesome. And the company, where's your dad work? Oh, he works at the glass factory. Oh, he works at PPG, and I wanted you to be sure and know the family aspect of it and the great aspect of the security that it offered our people and our town. This is where it starts for me. This is the picture of my grandfather's retirement at 43 years of service.
Interesting.
And I'll scan you a copy and send it to you. But my grandfather is in the suit in the middle of this picture.
Okay.
Surrounded by many employees from many different departments in the factory who were there to honor him. And there was also a large newspaper article, long newspaper article in the paper. And again, it was about the day he retired from the factory.
And that I've been finding that's very common, that they would make those big articles about these people that worked there for 40, 50, 60 years.
Yes. So my grandfather was there for 43 years. My father retired after 39 years. His sister, my Aunt Margaret, worked in the insurance and pension office in the office area. And I was unable to find out exactly how many years she worked there. Probably more than Dad's 39, probably in the 40s somewhere, I'm guessing. And then on the other side of my family, my mother had 2 brothers who worked at the factory. One of them was a crane operator, and that, of course, in a plant where your crane operator is handling big pieces of sheet glass up over people's heads, you want your crane operator to be someone that you trust. And my uncle Earl Pratt was a crane operator, and yesterday his daughter was telling me how she remembered stories of people that wouldn't work under the crane unless her dad was the crane operator. So they asked for him.
That's very funny.
Yeah.
My name's Rick Fisher. I've lived here my entire life. I currently own Cobblestone Frame and Art Gallery. Prior to that, I worked at the hospital for 20 plus years. My family truly looked at the glass factory as a part of our life. I mean, it was like a family business, even though we had nothing to do with the business part of it. They all worked there. They were all familiar with how the plant worked and functioned. And everyone knew that without the factory, we wouldn't have a town here. So it was held in pretty high reverence. I know that several times the glass factory would slow down, or they'd have maintenance to do where they'd be, they wouldn't be able to run for a while. When they put the float system in, they shut down for a while, and then the float system had to be repaired periodically, new bricks and things like that to keep it operating properly. So they love that factory, and whenever the plant would shut down like that, the factory would many times keep them, or as many as possible, working, just sweeping floors and stuff, so they didn't have to lay people off. So it was a mutual relationship. The factory was very good about honoring contracts. They were very good about keeping people working whenever they could. Nowadays we find that a lot of emphasis is put on the bottom line and returning dividend to the shareholders, whereas back in those days, PPG, at least, I don't know about the previous owners, but when I was a kid and my parents and grandparents worked there, the factory was very conscious of trying to take care of the workers, especially they knew that these people could fix things and run the plant, and they were a critical part of the operation. So nowadays things seem to be a little different, but back then PPG was more than just a place to go into work. Everyone kind of rallied around it and had some loyalty to it. Well, the community's reaction to the closing of the plant was, it was tough. I mean, we counted on that plant for revenue for schools, for fire trucks, for, it supported the community. So a lot of folks were very concerned when the factory was closing. We wanted the PPG to actually rebuild the float system and put a new factory there and operate that and continue with the legacy of the existing plant. The problem was the prices of glass had dropped. It was cheaper to buy foreign glass, and the plant itself needed a complete overhaul or rebuild, which was expensive. And Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company that owned the plant had sort of moved away from manufacturing glass, and they were doing more coatings. Almost the majority of automotive paint today is PPG paint. So they were doing coatings for that. They were doing coatings for like exterior, like for bridges and things like that. So the focus of PPG had moved from glass manufacturing and into coatings, to some degree because of foreign competition, and to some degree because there was a better profit margin in the coating business. So when this plant got too old to really be viable and needed a complete upgrade, overhaul, or rebuild, it just wasn't in the cards. So, we understood what was going on, but people were concerned. And you know what? Today, we look back on that, and it's still a challenge. I'm on city council in Crystal, and I know folks on the school board, and I know that without PPG, it's created challenges from lots of directions. I mean, we deal with it, but boy, I wish they'd come back and build a glass plant.
How did the closing impact you directly?
The closing of the plant impacted me directly because my dad worked there, my brother worked there. I had family members that were basically put out of work, retired early or lost their job because the plant was going away. It impacted me directly a little bit in the fact that not only was there fewer people working in the community and fewer taxes going towards the support of community benefits, but I actually, at that time, was running a graphic design company and a screen printing company, and some of the people who would have used my services that had side businesses and people that had just regular businesses, their volumes dropped down because we didn't have the employment base that we had previously. So as everything slowed down a little bit, I think everyone that lived here was impacted to some degree because there were not as many jobs and there wasn't as much money coming into the community. And it was a sad day when PPG closed their doors. When I was a kid, I mean a little kid, about like 8 or 9 years old, when my grandfather, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and when my grandfather would get off on the evening shift, I would walk down there and meet him. There was the old PPG hospital, which in the corner there, by that hospital, there was a bench, and they had a flower bed, and it was a nice little area. I would go down there and wait for him, and when he came out, I'd walk back to the house. We were only 5 blocks I grew up 5 blocks from the factory. So he would, I'd meet him there, and then we would walk over the bridge, and there was a bar there. A lot of people know it as Squeakers, but prior to it being called Squeakers, when I was a little kid, it was called Rhodes Fireside Lounge. And we would go into Rhodes, and I'd sit up there on a bar stool next to him, and he'd order me one of those. They used to have Coca-Cola in bottles that were about that tall, little bitty baby Cokes. So he would get a Falstaff beer and get me a bottle of Coke. He'd have one beer, and then we'd walk back to the house. Sometimes when he was going in, I would walk from the house with him to go into the factory for his evening shift. And there was a restaurant on the cobblestone street there at Mississippi just before you went over the bridge called Vaughn's Dairy. And when we'd get there, he'd give me $2 to go in and get a hamburger and a soda, and then I'd walk back to the house from there. So I have so many fond memories of the factory and the people that worked there. The town was a very safe place to be at that time. As a matter of fact, I purchased my grandparents' home on Taylor Avenue when they passed away, and that's where I live today. And that house was built out of lumber that came from PPG. They would take the scrap lumber when they'd uncrate things, and it would get piled in the back. And if the men went to their boss and said, "Hey, I need some lumber, I need some rock, I need whatever the material was," if it was scrap or if they had an abundance of it, they'd write them a ticket and say, "Here, go get it." So I long before my time, but my grandmother told me the story that my grandfather used to go down there every time they would have a pile of lumber out there. He would ask if he could have some or all of it. He'd take a trailer down there, load it up, and they'd come back, and those were the boards that they used to put the slats on our roof, the roof of the house that I live in now. Those boards are still there. It's been re-roofed a few times since then, but I think everyone that lives in this community would have stories about, who worked there, what they got from there, what it meant to them. The city wouldn't even be here without that factory. So it means something to anyone that's been here any length of time.
Just by looking at the community that surrounded Works 9, it is very clearly obvious that here is a town that really loved being a quote-unquote company town. We really get to see that PPG and the other glass companies made life very pleasant for the people of Crystal City. Here was a large group of people that wanted to go to work every day. They really loved their jobs. Here was a group of people that really cared. These people not only helped each other, but they helped the town. Sure, the company provided a lot, but it was really the people that did the heavy lifting, and the people that made things happen. Even today, you can see that. Even today, you can tell that people just really liked Works 9. Just think for a minute. How many families that were impacted by just one person's actions at Works 9? Just think about that.
Yeah,
Porch is gone?
got a permit through the Historical Society to try to grab hold of it.
This is a truck driver. I don't know who he is or where he's from or anything about it. Who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing?
Joe Wan from DeSoto, Missouri. Been here for 17 years. That's the only job I've ever had. Spot and trailer.
Who hauls this glass out now?
We're down to about 6 different truck lines. AJ Metler hauls most of it. PPG Corporate Trucking still hauls some. Supreme Express, which is hauling these export containers. There's not too many carriers left that are in the pool anymore.
How take the rest of the year?
Yeah, I think so.
Probably to get all the glass.
I think so.
As you can see, the glass plant had a lot of impact on the town. The town's purpose was to supply the plant with workers. Crystal City was a company town. It would grow into something far more than that. The glass plant brought the town and its people together. Husbands met their wives at Crystal City Works 9. While there are not many people left who can tell us about the plant, its history, the people that worked there, and its intertwined story with Crystal City, Missouri, we can learn from the past to make a better tomorrow, to learn history and all its flaws, to see a pain into the history of connection. And connection is what allows us to see history one pain at a time.